Well, this is going to be an interesting discussion because we are going to have a discussion with each other, peer-to-peer, as to say. And I hope you guys will learn something interesting about the bioeconomy, which is kind of different from what is usually going on at the South Summit. So maybe we'll start by letting you know what each of us does. So maybe Charles, you go ahead.
That's a great idea. It's actually the first time I've done this kind of discussion in front of an audience. It seems like what I do every day on Teams and Zooms, but here we're in front of an audience, which is different. So my name is Charles Miller. I'm the commercial director of a hybrid breeding potato company, Solenta. At Solenta, we use hybrid breeding to create a more sustainable future, and our mission really is to provide better products to farmers so they can increase their income in a sustainable way. And basically we do that by unlocking the potential within potatoes through genetics.
Potatoes, very important, right? So we are entering the realm of food production, and as you know, with the climate change, food production yields and all are going to go down. So it's a matter of food security and national security. So in order to protect that, it's very important that companies like Solenta exists, and they are working very hard to ensure the food security in countries. So maybe I'll tell about what I do. So I am an investment director at European Circular Bioeconomy Fund. So this is a fund which was created with the intention of pushing forward the bioeconomy in Europe. And what do we mean by bioeconomy? It means everything that has to do with the world of bio world, so food, agriculture, or materials that can be used, biomaterials that can be used to replace fossil fuel-based productions. So for example, packaging, all the plastics that we see, they are made from fossil fuels, and it's extractive, polluting, and well, harms the environment, as we know. So our fund is dedicated to investing in startups that are trying to create technologies that will make our economy transition to bio-based, renewable, as well as circular. And that's what the definition of bioeconomy is. But maybe, Charles, to talk about the bioeconomy, why is it so important today, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and it's actually one of the, it's easy for me to answer because that's one of the reasons that we founded Solenta.
Yeah.
We founded Solenta because we know that even 18 years ago when the company was founded, we knew that the food supply chain system globally was already broken. We knew what was happening was not sustainable. We knew population was growing, that the climate was changing, and those have a lot of implications, right? At the end of the day, more people means we need more food. Well, generally speaking, we're becoming, let's say, more affluent as a global population. That also means that we want a certain kind of food.
Yeah.
And all those things mean producing more of a higher quality with less land, worse land actually, because the better land is going to other uses, less water, and all those things mean we have to completely rethink our food value chain. And that's one of the things that through our company we hope will make our small contribution to the world. And if you think about it, maybe it's not so small, because potatoes are the 4th largest consumed crop in the world.
True. And so in terms of the trends around food technology or in agri-tech, what are the other things that you are seeing, and do you see, what gaps do you see in terms of, as investors, what more could we do in promoting the bioeconomy?
Yeah, I think part of the promotion of the bioeconomy involves a lot more local activities. Okay. You mentioned that in your introduction, how you talk about working more locally, and I think that's something that I'm seeing definitely change within the world. And if you think about the potato value chain, most of the seed for potatoes is coming from Europe. It's coming from the Americas, and it goes to faraway places. And that's incredibly inefficient because you're chartering ships to ship effectively low-value products from one country halfway around the world. And there's huge risk in that, not to mention the damage to the environment with fossil fuels, carbon, and you name it. So I think we really have to understand how to transition from a global network, which we need, but empower local environments to really be more self-sufficient.
Okay, so the idea is that in order to make the food supply chain, also the countries more food secure, the supply chain actually needs to be shorter.
Exactly.
Okay, so that brings to an interesting point, because we are so used to globalization and thinking globalization is good, and it is good in many places, in many industries, but for food maybe it might not be the best idea.
I think it's not the best idea in terms of a whole supply chain. It creates a very long supply chain, which creates risk, and those risks then show themselves in food insecurity and nutrition insecurity, which we all want to avoid. They also show themselves in inefficient farming practices in the end. And we also need to solve that as part of a more circular agriculture that needs to evolve.
Great, yeah, that's food for thought. I assume when you guys go to the supermarkets and buy fruits and vegetables, if you see the packaging many times in Spain, you will see the grapes are coming from South Africa, or the blueberries are coming from Chile, so that's a global supply chain in action. But we don't probably keep in mind that there's a carbon footprint associated with that those products are actually being flown in aircrafts or in ships, depending on the fragility and the shelf life. And that's an important concern when we take into account the supply chain. Correct.
And so from an investor's point of view, what do you like to hear when you're talking to these bio companies? Because I'm sure you have your own views about what should be changed or problems that should be solved. Yeah,
well, as investors, we operate under, obviously, our investment theses. And so for us, carbon footprint is a big factor when we decide whether to invest in a company or not. So for example, as you say, if the technology is replacing a conventional technology that has a higher carbon footprint, only then, so our technology needs to have a lower carbon footprint, in the, told in the other way, and only then we can invest. So for example, in agri-tech, we very actively look at all sorts of technologies that are reducing the usage of chemicals, like fertilizers and harmful pesticides and herbicides on farms. And there are quite a lot of interesting companies coming up in Europe and US. For example, they're using good bacteria to fight bad bacteria. So you don't need chemicals, because chemicals kill all sorts of bacteria. Some are good actually for the plants. You will know that very well. And then there are digital equipments which are have high sensor, cameras that can detect the weed, for example, and very precisely spray just over there instead of spraying on a broad basis. So that's kind of reducing up to 85% many times of the herbicides that you use on farms. So those are criteria that, from the agri-tech perspective, we consider very, very critically. And also, we can't forget, obviously, that seeds are a very interesting area for us, because we know that growth, yield, and nutrition, all of that depends on the seed that you select. So that is an area that we haven't yet done investments, but we are very closely looking at it. But that's where I particularly work. Our fund in general looks at the bioeconomy broadly. So there's a lot of interesting things happening, which is, for example, using food waste or agricultural waste to produce biodegradable packaging materials. So all the food trays, when we order on Deliveroo or Glovo, the food trays that come, many times you might have not noticed, previously used to be styrofoam, which cannot be recycled, which are indestructible. So now a lot of companies are changing already to materials that are biodegradable. So, but that is coming from startups doing innovation, using all the residues in order to make packaging like that. So that's a big area. Another area are all sorts of chemicals that are used for different things that we use as ingredients, but trying to make them also from bacterial fermentation. That's a very interesting technology. And so we are kind of bypassing the fossil fuel, petroleum-based pathways and trying to look at how circular and green the chemicals can be. So it's a very interesting space, and luckily we are in the European Union, and we have The European Commission also promoting these kinds of milestones.
Yep.
So there is an objective to reduce pesticides on farms by 50% by 2030. And there's also a lot of incentive on going green in fuels and chemicals. But the rest of the world also has to look up. Which actually, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, which actually brings me to the point. So where do you see the application of your seeds or the, the main interest? Do you see it in developing countries, developed countries, or in general?
No, thanks for asking that. That's actually what I was going to do is give you some examples of what we're doing. But before I do that, I'd also like to add that there are a tremendous amount, as you probably know better than me, of innovators in this space right now.
Yeah.
And you mentioned one that I think is really being looked at right now, and that's the idea of biologicals to control all kinds of things. Everything from fertilizing the plants to controlling the pests that attack the plants. And there are some amazing innovations coming out right now and that are being worked on. But more specifically of what Sylenta is doing, and I think we're doing some really unique things. And Sylenta actually invented the idea of a hybrid potato. It didn't exist before our company was there. And so it gives us a unique insight because of what we learned in developing hybrids for potatoes and how we can manipulate the genetics, completely GMO-free, by the way. And one of the biggest pests that impacts potatoes is late blight. It's also what caused the Irish potato famine decades ago. It still hasn't really been controlled well other than spraying fungicides. And here in the EU, well, at least in the northern EU, farmers spray every 7 to 10 days fungicide on this crop just to preempt losing their crop. Exactly. And that cost farmers something like 600 or 700 million euros per year, and that's probably going to be at least 50% higher this year. And that doesn't include the farmer's time, the fuel, the compaction of the soil, and all the other things that you have to include these days, the carbon around doing that and continual spraying. Well, one of the things that we've proven, and you can find this in EU reports, we've proven that with our technology, you can stack multiple genes that are completely resistant to late blight. And we've successfully stacked more than 3 genes. And what that does is it actually creates a product that will survive even when blight is there for an entire year and protect that crop and allow the farmer to get a yield, a good yield. And that means less chemical usage and less carbon footprint. And that's exactly what we need in these times. Now, not only does that solve the carbon issue that we have in Europe and some of the developed countries, but taking that to underdeveloped countries, it solves much more than a carbon issue. It solves a food insecurity issue.
Yeah. I mean, that's the perfect example because right now with the war that is happening, I don't know if you're aware, but there's a huge issue of how farmers can actually access pesticides and fertilizers because between Russia and Ukraine, they produce 60% of the fertilizers. So there's a disruption happening in the food production, and who knows how much the food inflation will be. And probably in the Western world will not be impacted so much, but when you look into Latin America, Africa, and Asian countries, there will be huge issues. And it's probably, we might think that it's far away, it will not impact us, but it does impact us because food insecurity actually leads to civil unrest.
Exactly.
And then there's displacement of people, and then there's mass migrations of people. So it's all linked. So the more the countries actually are independent and not reliant on external factors, which can be, as you say, seeds, better seeds that are adaptable to climate, that actually provide or does not need so many inputs on the farms. It's better for the country's food security.
Well, and I think there's so many things that we can do in this ag space to change that also benefit society as a whole, local societies. For example, production of seeds done in very isolated pockets around the world. And if we can start to build capacity in other locations so that the seed can be produced there, it creates a tremendous amount of local employment at reasonably well-paying jobs. And that's another way to help lift the whole society and reduce our reliability on these extremely long supply chains.
Very true. Now, thinking of the ecosystem around bioeconomy and these kinds of things, obviously isolated, nothing can happen. There needs to be startups, there needs to be capital, there needs to be public policy. And how do you see the role of corporates as well in that? So do you see that large established corporations can also become allies instead of going against them in this bioeconomy space?
Absolutely. I mean, we're not a large established corporation, but I know we like to partner with all the right partners. It doesn't matter where they are. Of course, we have to find that fit. And one of our mantras is we like to do things together, not separate. But I also do think the large corporates see that same vision. They know that they need to be more local. And I happen to be on the board of several of the global seed associations, and this is one of the topics that comes up over and over again. How do we really start to work from with a global perspective, but more locally?
That's a very good point. Okay.
And when you think about the investing that your group does, is it solely focused on Europe for the European goals?
Yeah, so our fund, by our investment thesis and charter, we invest in the European Union and the associated countries of Horizon 2020, so Turkey, Israel, Switzerland, Norway. We can invest in foreign companies as long as they have a subsidiary in EU, and then we can invest in the subsidiary. So it's a little bit flexible, but we cannot directly invest in a US headquartered company in the headquarters, for example.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. So in Spain, we are also actively looking for companies. We have not yet been able to do so, mainly because we do late-stage investments. So when these startups are actually scaling, so Series B, Series C is probably
so that's the sweet spot that you're looking for.
So in Spain, I see, since I'm based in Barcelona and I have lived here since a very long time, there are a lot of companies which are coming up, not just in agri-tech or food tech, but also sustainable packaging and animal health care, which is also one of our areas. But they're still at the seed stage, I would say, or early Series A. So I'm hoping in the next 2 years or so, there will be interesting companies for us as a fund to invest in.
Okay, nice.
And in terms of the completing the ecosystem part, are there special policies that the EU is promoting towards food security, which includes what you are doing at Solinta, or what other things do you see, or any gaps that you see that could be done from a policy level?
No, I think from a policy point of view, there's a lot of forward thinking in this space already. And one of the things we see is there is a lot of promotion about this idea of the green revolution, if you will, right? The farm to table, these kind of things, and that creates a lot of interesting investment opportunities, even for companies like us to take advantage of, where we can really focus on a need, and the EU will fund that, and then we'll be able to launch it together. I do think that we need to rethink some of the regulatory rules,
right?
Not just in Europe, but many places around the world, to allow, let's say, an open science-based regulatory system as opposed to an emotional-based regulatory system. That's going to help promote innovation. It's also going to help promote a long-term sustainable food supply, in my opinion.
Right. Because the regulatory policy right now, the way it's framed, is really not incentivizing truly sustainable practices.
Correct, yes.
That is true. So,
and it's also different from country to country, even within the EU. And while we like to think that within the EU, I'm based in the Netherlands, by the way, so, but while we like to think within the EU that it's all the same, it's not all the same when it comes to regulation around food.
Right.
There is an umbrella, would like to see this happening, but each country then can set some of its own rules, and it makes it somewhat complicated.
I think the regulatory point is very important because we struggle as investors in that area, mainly because there are a lot of good technologies that we see in the bioeconomy space. So they're making biochemicals, other products, we're using agri-waste, food waste, using very interesting technology. However, of course, they have to compete with commodity companies like the BASF and the buyers.
Sure.
And they are legacy industries, their plants are running for 40 years, so how do you compete at the same cost level with them? And they can't.
Sure.
But also, I don't think at a policy level it's fair, because they are actually not contributing to reducing climate change. In fact, the other way around, but
Sure.
they're not being penalized for that.
Exactly.
And so the point is that there's probably not a lack of technology, it's there, but they need to play at the same level field. They're not playing at the same
That's
field.
right. That level playing field is very
Yeah.
important, and that's one of the reasons we need to make sure the regulatory environment supports innovation and that it's science-based, because then it helps to
Exactly.
level the field. So when you think about all these various aspects of a new innovation, the regulatory system, the team members that are there, the patent background if there happens to be one, what are the kind of the top 2 or 3 things that you're looking for in this space?
Well, definitely as VC investors, we need to make investments which will return us a lot of money. So, unique technology with patents is the first tick that we cannot invest in general technology which anybody else is doing.
Yeah.
So it has to be good. But then quickly we come to the next step, where you can have a unique technology, but it also has to be viable for market economically. So as long as, if you are at par with the commodities today, great. But even if it's not, if it's a 10% premium, still it's okay, because you will have these segments. So those two are very important. And third is how scalable and quickly scalable you are, which unfortunately is not very easy when you go for, you are building a chemical plant.
Yeah.
It takes 2 years to build a plant and commission it, and then it's 50 million of capex for generating 20 KT of
speaking from
product.
experience, I know exactly what you mean. Trying to scale our company's been a challenge.
So we are not the typical VCs, that's why.
No.
So we are not the VCs who are looking in the same way at a startup as a B2B SaaS enterprise VC is looking at. Like in 3 years you scale 10x, and then you exit in 4 years or 5 years. No, we are patient, and our investors are patient.
Yeah.
So there needs to be patience in the system in order to make changes, and that cannot happen in 5 years, 3 years.
Sure.
So as investors also, we look at it in a different way, that we are here for as long term as possible, which is 7, 8 years, sometimes the maximum of our limit, which is 10 years.
Sure. No,
but it doesn't mean that those are bad investments,
No.
So in terms of returns and our impact on as an investor, it's very good. But it's just that it's not a short-term game for us.
No, actually it's comforting for me to hear you say that, because I've been in this space for a while, and it's not a short-term space.
Exactly. So if we are to ensure food security, if we are to ensure that really agriculture becomes transformative, it won't happen in 3 years. It will happen in 10 years, 15 years, and we have to be there.
Sounds
So,
good.
yeah.
Well, I think we are almost out of time.
Oh, we are almost time. Wow. We are very
That's
punctual.
amazing.
I was about to bring you some beers or something, some wines. Well,
I think this is a
final
topic
words
we could continue talking on quite a bit. But
Yeah, we
please
can
finish up. You have some closing comments, maybe?
Well, I am very happy to see that 2 years ago, when I was still investing in agri-food, but the space and the innovation and number of VCs who actually think about climate tech and agri-tech, food tech, bioeconomy was very less. And I'm very happy now that I have many colleagues in this space, competitor funds, sorry. And so it's growing, and which means that investors, our LPs, so the ones who are actually putting the money, they're also thinking strategically and long term. So that makes me very happy.
No, nice. Well, from my perspective, I'm really glad that finally, in my view, that this concept of a biorevolution is really starting to take hold, and it's really starting to have an impact. And I'm very fortunate that I get to travel to a lot of places around the world and see it in action. And for the first time in the last 20 years, I am seeing it in action. There's a tremendous amount of excitement in this space, and thanks to groups like yours as well, not just the innovators. But I think it's something we have to do to save the planet. There's no
to
other
save
option.
ourselves.
Yeah,
to save ourselves.
So I guess I would end with that, to say we have to do this, and we have to find a way.
And we are doing this, so the more the merrier.